The Holloway house sat on the edge of a narrow country road outside a small Kentucky town, its white paint fading and its shutters stiff against the wind. Inside, silence carried a weight heavier than words, as though each wall had learned to hold its breath. Evelyn Holloway, the eldest daughter, had grown accustomed to that silence. At 17, she moved through the house with the quiet precision expected of her, folding linens in straight lines, polishing the dining table until her reflection blurred in the dark wood. Every motion was a duty, every pause an invitation for correction. Her father, Thomas Holloway, believed order was proof of loyalty. He carried himself like a man carved from the soil of their land, broad-shouldered, stern-eyed, his voice rarely rising yet never needing to. When he spoke, the house listened. His rules were woven into every corner, no idle talk at supper, no laughter that drew attention, no questioning of his word. Clara, Evelyn's younger sister by 2 years, had a lighter spirit, though she hid it beneath lowered eyes. She loved to sketch in the margins of her notebooks, slipping graphite across paper, with a grace she never showed at the dinner table. At 15, she still believed that the world beyond their father's reach was waiting, yet she feared the consequences of testing his boundaries. Evelyn often caught her staring out the window at dusk, when the sky bled into shades of violet, and knew Clara's heart longed for more than the rigid walls of their home. Their mother, Margaret, moved like a shadow between them all. Once lively, she now spoke in whispers, her hands always busy with tasks that seemed endless, stirring pots, ironing shirts, mending hems. To Evelyn, her mother's silence was both protection and prison, shielding the girls from Thomas's sharper temper while reminding them that survival meant obedience. It was a Sunday afternoon, when the unease of their lives pressed most heavily. Church had ended hours ago, yet the weight of sermons lingered like dust clinging to their clothes. The Holloways sat in the living room, the television dark, the air filled only by the creak of wood as the house settled. Thomas sat in his armchair, a thick Bible resting on his lap, though his eyes rarely moved across the pages. Evelyn knew he used it less for reading and more for reinforcing his authority, quoting lines that bent toward his will. "Evelyn," his voice cut the silence deep and even, "did you finish your assignments for school this week?" "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice measured, steady. "And Clara?" His gaze shifted, steady as a beam of light. "Yes, sir," Clara answered, though her tone carried hesitation. Evelyn noticed the faint tremor in her sister's hands as they rested against her skirt. Thomas gave a slow nod, as if granting permission for them to breathe again. The room eased, but the tension never left. It never did. Later that evening, when Thomas retired early, Evelyn found Clara in their shared room, sketchbook spread open across her knees. The lamp cast a warm glow over the page, revealing a drawing of a field stretching into an open horizon. "You shouldn't let him see that," Evelyn warned softly, though there was no anger in her voice. Clara looked up, her eyes wide, searching. "Do you ever think about leaving? Just walking past the fence and not stopping?" Evelyn hesitated. She wanted to say yes, to confess how often the thought haunted her nights. Instead, she folded her arms, keeping her voice careful. "Thinking about it doesn't make it possible." "But maybe it does," Clara whispered, almost pleading. Evelyn turned toward the window. Outside, cicadas sang into the heavy summer night, their voices relentless and sharp. She envied their freedom, their chorus unrestrained. And in that moment, a quiet realization settled in her chest. If she did not act, the weight of her father's rules would become the shape of her future. She could feel the rest of her life tightening around her like the knots of rope on a barn beam. It was a truth she could not admit aloud, not yet, but deep inside, Evelyn knew the Holloway household was more than a home. It was a cage. And cages, no matter how strong, always left room for cracks. Subscribe now to follow the Holloway girls' journey, where every secret and every choice could decide their fate. The rhythm of the Holloway household was as rigid as the ticking clock that ruled its hours. Each day unfolded with the same predictable cadence: breakfast before sunrise, chores completed before school, and an evening dinner where silence stretched longer than the prayer said before eating. To outsiders, it might have looked like discipline. Inside, for Evelyn and Clara, it felt like a script written by someone else, one they had no choice but to perform. Every morning began with Thomas's heavy footsteps on the floorboards, the signal that the house must already be awake. Evelyn would rise quickly, pressing her hair into a neat braid before rushing to set the table. Clara moved slower, often lingering by the window, her eyes following the first streaks of daylight over the fields. Evelyn nudged her sister gently whenever Thomas's voice rumbled down the hallway. At the table, Thomas bowed his head in prayer, his words measured, heavy with authority. "Lord, grant us strength to fulfill our duties and honor this family." The girls repeated Amen softly, their voices blending into Margaret's weary tone. Breakfast was not a time for laughter or idle talk. The clink of forks against plates became the only sound permitted. Chores filled the gaps before school. Evelyn scrubbed floors until her knuckles reddened, while Clara dusted furniture and polished frames that lined the walls. Each frame held photographs of ancestors Thomas often spoke about, men who had worked the land, women who had served quietly beside them. "Our family thrives because we remember who we are," he liked to say, his voice echoing in every corner. The words pressed heavily on Evelyn. She wanted to remember, but she also wanted to choose. At school, the weight of home never left them. Evelyn excelled in class, her mind sharp and hungry for knowledge, yet she always lowered her eyes when praised. She could feel her father's shadow even in the hallways. Clara, on the other hand, hid her sketches between the pages of textbooks, glancing nervously whenever a teacher walked past. School was supposed to be freedom, but for the Holloway girls, it was only a pause before returning to silence. In the evenings, the family gathered around the dinner table again. Margaret served plates quietly, her hands quick, her eyes downcast. Thomas led another prayer, then turned to his daughters with questions that sounded more like inspections. "Evelyn," he asked one evening, his fork hovering above his plate, "did you complete your reading for church?" "Yes, sir," she replied, keeping her tone respectful, though her heart quickened. "And Clara," his gaze shifted, sharp enough to cut through the air, "did you spend your time wisely today?" Clara swallowed hard, setting her fork down. "Yes, sir," she whispered, though Evelyn noticed the faint smear of pencil on her fingers, proof of her secret sketches. Thomas studied her for a moment longer before nodding. "Good. A Holloway girl must never waste her hours." The word stung. Clara lowered her eyes, but Evelyn felt the heat of her sister's shame and the quiet rebellion trembling beneath it. After dinner, the silence thickened. Thomas read his Bible in the living room, Margaret mended clothes by the lamp, and the girls sat with their homework. Clara's pencil lingered too long on the margin of her notebook. Evelyn reached across the table, whispering sharply, "Stop before he notices." Clara's eyes flashed with quiet defiance. "Why should he control even this?" "Because he will," Evelyn answered, her voice low but firm, "and you know what happens when he does." The reminder was enough. Clara closed her notebook, though her fingers lingered on the edge as if reluctant to let go. Upstairs in their room, Evelyn lay awake long after Clara had drifted into restless sleep. She listened to the crickets outside, the soft rustle of curtains in the warm night air, and the steady rhythm of her father's footsteps downstairs. His presence seemed endless, stretching even into her dreams. She thought of his words, "A Holloway girl must never waste her hours," and wondered what he would call the hours she spent imagining a life of her own. Would he call them wasted, or would he fear them? Evelyn turned toward the window, the night sky vast and dark above the fields. She pressed her hand against the glass as though the world beyond could feel her touch. Somewhere out there, she believed, silence didn't rule. Somewhere she could breathe without asking permission. That thought lingered, small but alive, a seed growing in the cracks of her father's order. The school sat in the center of town, its brick walls warmed by the Kentucky sun, and its flag rippling gently in the late morning breeze. For Evelyn, walking through its doors felt like stepping into a different life. The air carried laughter, the shuffle of papers, the ringing of lockers, sounds that contrasted sharply with the silence of the Holloway home. Here, her father's voice didn't echo. Here she could almost believe she belonged to herself. Evelyn's intelligence rarely went unnoticed. Teachers often praised her essays and sharp insights, but she always answered with modesty, her head lowered. Praise felt dangerous, as though someone might carry word of it back to her father, and Thomas would remind her that humility mattered more than ambition. Still, each word of recognition fed something deep inside her, a hunger she could neither quiet nor deny. It was Mr. Carter, her English teacher, who noticed most. He was in his mid-30s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a way of speaking that made even Shakespeare sound alive. One afternoon, after returning an assignment, he paused at Evelyn's desk. "Your writing shows more than knowledge," he said softly, so only she could hear. "It shows thought." "Don't be afraid of that." Evelyn nodded quickly, tucking the graded paper into her folder before anyone else could notice. His words echoed in her mind the rest of the day, warming her like a secret flame. Clara, meanwhile, found a different kind of freedom. She gravitated toward Anna Parker, a girl with an easy laugh and bright clothes that clashed against the muted tones of the Holloway wardrobe. Anna carried herself as though the world was hers to take, talking about movies she'd seen in Louisville, music she discovered on the radio, and her plans to study fashion after graduation. One afternoon, as they sat under the maple trees near the courtyard, Anna leaned close to Clara. "You're always doodling," she said, pointing at Clara's sketchbook. "You've got real talent. Why don't you ever show anyone?" Clara's cheeks flushed. "It's just for me." Anna smirked, tilting her head. "It shouldn't be. People would love this. You could do something with it, you know." Clara hesitated, her pencil lingering on the page. "My father wouldn't allow it." Anna rolled her eyes, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Your father doesn't get to decide your whole life." Clara didn't answer, but the words struck her like lightning. She tucked them away, repeating them silently, even as fear shadowed her hope. Inside the classrooms, Evelyn carried herself with careful precision. Yet each time Mr. Carter asked for volunteers, her hand twitched with the urge to rise. She wanted to speak, to let her ideas be heard, but she kept her voice buried. After class, he sometimes stopped her at the door. "You're quiet," he told her once, "but I can see you're thinking. Don't let fear silence you. The world needs voices like yours." Her chest tightened with both gratitude and dread. She wanted to believe him, but believing meant admitting that her father was wrong, and that thought was dangerous even within her own mind. As the school day ended and the buses pulled away, Evelyn and Clara walked the long road home together. The air smelled of cut grass and gasoline from the departing vehicles. Clara clutched her sketchbook against her chest, her steps light with Anna's words still ringing in her ears. Evelyn walked slower, her mind caught between Mr. Carter's encouragement and the looming weight of her father's expectations. "Anna says I should share my drawings," Clara whispered suddenly. Evelyn glanced at her. "Do you want to?" "I think so," Clara admitted, her voice trembling. "But I'm scared." Evelyn looked ahead at the gravel path leading to their house, its silhouette rising like a shadow in the distance. "We can want things," she said quietly, "even if we're scared." The words hung between them, fragile but alive, like a secret they could not yet name. Evelyn sat at the desk in the back of her classroom, the late afternoon light pouring through the tall windows, catching dust in the air like sparks. Mr. Carter had just announced a regional writing contest, his voice carrying both excitement and urgency. "It's open to all students," he explained, "and the theme this year is Voices of Tomorrow." He looked across the room, his eyes pausing briefly on Evelyn before moving on. "Your words matter. Don't be afraid to let them out." Evelyn's heart pounded. She had never thought of herself as someone whose words could matter beyond her own notebooks. Yet the thought of speaking through her writing, of being heard by strangers who didn't know the Holloway name, ignited something dangerous and alive inside her. On the bus ride home, she turned the idea over like a secret stone in her pocket. Clara sat beside her, sketchbook open on her knees, pencil moving restlessly. Evelyn watched the lines form into a figure standing beneath a wide-open sky. "What's that?" Evelyn asked softly. Clara shrugged, though her cheeks colored. A girl who isn't afraid. Maybe me. Maybe not. Evelyn leaned closer. Would you ever show it to someone? Outside of here? Clara's hands froze. You know I can't. If Father found out, he doesn't have to, Evelyn interrupted. You could hide it. Give it to Anna, maybe. Clara bit her lip, her eyes flickering with both fear and hope. She'd love that, she admitted. She says her aunt buys little paintings from kids in town. Nothing big, just sketches. The bus jolted to a stop, and both sisters tucked their secrets away. Yet the seed had been planted. Evelyn would write, Clara would draw. For once they would act not for their father, but for themselves. That night, while Thomas read his Bible in the living room and Margaret hemmed a shirt at the kitchen table, Evelyn bent over her notebook in their shared bedroom. Her pen scratched against paper as words poured out faster than she could control them. She wrote about silence, about the cage of expectation, about voices buried beneath rules. She wrote without naming her father, but his shadow loomed over every line. Clara sat cross-legged on her bed, shading the horizon of her drawing. She paused, glancing at Evelyn. What are you writing? Something that won't matter, Evelyn lied, though her hand never slowed. Clara tilted her head. If it doesn't matter, why do you look like you can finally breathe? Evelyn froze, pen hovering above the page. She didn't answer, but Clara smiled faintly, returning to her sketch. The following day, Evelyn slipped her essay into the envelope provided by Mr. Carter, her fingers trembling as though she were placing her entire life inside. She gave it to him quietly after class, their eyes meeting only for a second. He nodded, no words exchanged, as though he understood the weight of her choice. Meanwhile, Clara tucked 2 of her sketches into Anna's backpack during lunch, pretending it was a joke. Don't laugh, she said quickly, her face burning. Anna's eyes widened as she pulled them out. Clara, these are beautiful. I mean it. My aunt will pay for these. You could make more. Clara's throat tightened. For a moment she wanted to believe, but then she whispered, Just don't tell anyone where they came from. That evening, the sisters returned home with secrets folded carefully between their books. Supper passed in silence, Thomas's gaze heavy but distracted. Margaret studied her daughters from across the table, something like recognition glinting in her tired eyes. Later, when the house grew quiet, Evelyn and Clara lay in their beds, listening to the crickets outside. Their hearts beat fast with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. For the first time, they had stepped beyond their father's reach. Small steps, hidden steps, but steps nonetheless. And small defiance, Evelyn thought, was still defiance. The late summer heat pressed against the Holloway house thick and unrelenting. Cicadas droned from the trees, their song steady and loud, as though the world outside was alive with voices Evelyn and Clara were forbidden to join. Inside, the air was quieter, tighter, carrying the unspoken weight of their father's gaze. Thomas Holloway had always prided himself on noticing things others overlooked. The devil works in the smallest cracks, he often said, his eyes narrowing whenever one of his daughters hesitated before answering. That belief made every glance, every pause, a risk. One afternoon, Clara lingered on the front porch steps, her sketchbook tucked at her side. Anna Parker had stopped by on her way home from town, her laughter carrying easily across the yard. Clara's voice, light and unguarded, joined in for a moment, until Thomas's shadow stretched across the doorframe. Clara. His tone was calm, but it froze the air. Inside. Clara's smile faltered. She stood quickly, clutching her book against her chest. Anna's grin faded too, though she tried to mask it with a casual wave. Clara walked past her father, her shoulders rigid, her footsteps clipped against the wooden floor. Once the door closed, Thomas's voice filled the hallway. A Holloway girl doesn't idle away her time gossiping. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Clara whispered, her head bowed. I will remember your place. The reprimand ended there, but its echo lingered. Evelyn, standing near the kitchen doorway, clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms. She wanted to speak, to defend her sister, but the weight of her father's authority pressed down too hard. Instead, She swallowed her anger, though it burned her throat. Later that night, Evelyn found Clara curled on their bed, her sketchbook untouched. "He doesn't understand," Clara muttered, her voice breaking. "Anna she makes me feel like I'm not trapped here." Evelyn sat beside her, brushing a hand over her sister's shoulder. "He'll never understand," she said softly, "but we do. That has to be enough, for now." Clara nodded, though tears welled in her eyes. She wiped them quickly, as though even sorrow needed to be hidden in this house. Downstairs, Margaret moved quietly through the kitchen. Her hands worked on mending, but her ears caught every sound from upstairs. When Evelyn came down for water, Margaret met her gaze. For a moment, her eyes held a flicker of something, pity perhaps, or solidarity. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pressed a worn book into Evelyn's hands. "Keep this," Margaret whispered. "Read it when you can." Evelyn glanced down. It was a collection of poems, the cover faded, the pages soft with age. Her throat tightened. "If he finds out, then hide it better than I ever did," Margaret interrupted, her voice sharper than Evelyn expected. For once, her mother's tone held not only fear, but defiance. Evelyn carried the book upstairs like a secret treasure. She placed it beneath her pillow, her heart racing, and whispered to Clara, "Mother gave me something." Clara's eyes widened when Evelyn revealed the book. She reached out, running her fingers across the fragile cover. "Why would she risk it?" "Because she knows," Evelyn answered quietly. "Because she remembers what it feels like to want more." The sisters lay awake, the book hidden between them, its presence a small shield against the silence of the house. Evelyn thought of her father's watchful eyes, the way he seemed to sense even the faintest flicker of rebellion. But she also thought of her mother's gift, her sister's longing, her own words sealed in an envelope already sent away. For the first time, Evelyn realized the truth. Her father's control was powerful, but it was not complete. Cracks existed, and in those cracks, hope could take root. Still, she knew he was watching, always watching, and sooner or later he would notice the change in his daughters. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked among bills and advertisements in the worn mailbox by the gravel road. Evelyn collected the mail as she always did, careful to separate it neatly before setting it on the kitchen table. Her father would open each envelope that belonged to him, but she spotted her own name written across one in careful type. Her chest tightened. It was from the regional writing contest. She slipped it beneath her books before Thomas entered the kitchen. His boots thudded against the floor, his eyes sweeping across the room with their usual authority. Evelyn kept her head down, her breath steady, until he left with his stack of mail. Only then did she retreat to her room, the letter pressed against her ribs as though it might vanish if she let go. When she tore it open in secret, her hands shook. The words leapt from the page, "Congratulations, your essay has been selected for recognition." Evelyn read the sentence again and again, her heart soaring with something she had never felt before, proof that her voice had reached beyond the Holloway walls. Clara noticed immediately. "What is it?" she whispered, glancing over as Evelyn folded the letter quickly. "Nothing," Evelyn said at first, fear knotting her stomach, but Clara's eyes, wide with curiosity and trust, wore her down. She held out the page, her voice low. "They chose me for the contest." Clara gasped softly, covering her mouth. "Evelyn, that's incredible." She hugged her sister tightly, then pulled back with a nervous glance at the door. "But you can't tell him." "I know," Evelyn replied, slipping the letter back into her book. "Not yet." The days that followed carried a new energy for Evelyn. At school, Mr. Carter pulled her aside after class. "I heard the news," he said with a quiet smile. "You should be proud. This is only the beginning, Evelyn. You have a gift, and the world needs it." Her throat tightened. "If my father finds out—" "Then you must be careful," Mr. Carter interrupted gently. "But don't let fear stop you, promise me that." She nodded, her voice caught in her chest. His faith in her felt like sunlight breaking through clouds, a warmth she hadn't realized she was starving for. Meanwhile, Clara carried her own secret spark. Anna had returned the sketches with news that her aunt was thrilled and wanted to buy more. Clara blushed furiously when Anna pressed a folded bill into her hand. "This is yours," Anna insisted. "Don't argue. Your work deserves it." That evening, Clara showed the money to Evelyn, her fingers trembling. "It's not much, but it's real. Someone thinks my drawings are worth something." Evelyn smiled, though worry tugged at her. "You have to hide it. If he sees—" "I know," Clara interrupted. She tucked the money into the lining of her notebook, her eyes glowing with pride. "But for once, I don't feel like I'm just surviving. I feel like I'm building something." Their mother noticed the change too. Margaret watched her daughters more closely at supper, a faint light softening the weariness in her eyes. She didn't ask questions, but Evelyn caught her mother's lips curve in the slightest smile when Clara's face brightened. It was as if Margaret understood without needing words. That night, Evelyn lay awake with the letter beneath her pillow, Clara's quiet breathing beside her. She thought of her essay, her voice out in the world, and her sister's drawings, hidden but alive. For the first time, the walls of the Holloway home didn't feel so absolute. Hope, Evelyn realized, was dangerous. But it was also unstoppable once it had taken root. The Holloway dining room was unusually still, even for a Sunday evening. The heavy oak table gleamed under the soft light, and the smell of roasted chicken filled the air. Evelyn and Clara sat side by side, their hands folded neatly on their laps, their eyes lowered as their father cleared his throat. Thomas Holloway's voice was calm yet final as he spoke. "I've made a decision about your futures." Evelyn's pulse quickened. She glanced at Clara, who looked up briefly before lowering her eyes again. "You will remain here," Thomas continued. "Both of you. A Holloway daughter's duty is to her family, not to some foolish dreams in the outside world. You'll stay and serve this household as your mother has done." Clara's lips parted, but no words came. Evelyn's stomach twisted, her father's decree crashing down like a gavel. She had known his control was heavy, but to hear him strip away their future so plainly made the air in the room unbearable. Margaret's hand trembled as she set down a serving spoon. Her face remained composed, but her eyes flickered briefly with something sharp. Anger, sorrow, regret. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar mask of silence. "Do you understand?" Thomas asked, his gaze hard and expectant. "Yes, sir," Evelyn said, her voice steady though her chest ached. Clara hesitated, her throat tight. Finally, she whispered, "Yes, sir." Thomas nodded, satisfied. He returned to his meal, the clink of silverware echoing in the heavy silence. That night, upstairs in their room, Clara burst into quiet sobs, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. "He's never going to let us leave, Evelyn. Never. Everything Anna talks about, school, freedom, it's impossible for us." Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, her hands gripping her knees. "He doesn't get to decide forever," she whispered fiercely. "He can't." Clara shook her head. "You heard him. He means it. If we try—" She broke off, her voice cracking. Evelyn leaned closer, her own fear clashing with determination. "Then we try anyway. We find a way he doesn't see." For a moment, Clara looked at her as though she wanted to believe, but the weight of their father's words pressed down too hard, and she turned away, her tears soaking into the pages of her sketchbook. Later, Margaret entered quietly, her steps soft across the creaking floorboards. She sat on Evelyn's bed, her shoulders slumped, her hands folded in her lap. For a long time she said nothing, the silence stretching between them. Finally she whispered, "I once dreamed of being a nurse." Evelyn and Clara both looked up, startled. "I had a scholarship," Margaret continued, her voice low, almost as if confessing a sin. "A chance to leave this town, but your grandfather said no, and then Thomas, well, he promised security, a future." I believed him. Her voice faltered. She pressed her hand to her eyes, steadying herself before looking at her daughters. "Don't waste your lives the way I wasted mine." Evelyn's heart clenched. It was the first time her mother had spoken of her own past, the first time she had admitted the cost of silence. "We don't know how," Evelyn whispered. "You'll find a way," Margaret said firmly, though her eyes glistened. "One of you must." She stood, smoothing her apron before leaving the room. The door closed softly, but her words lingered, heavy with both sorrow and hope. Evelyn lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling. Her father's command echoed in her mind, but so did her mother's confession. For the first time she understood the depth of what was at stake, not just her future, but the chance to break a cycle that had bound generations. And though fear pressed hard against her chest, Evelyn knew this: submission would no longer be enough. The days after Thomas's decree carried a heavier silence than usual, yet beneath it, Evelyn felt a stirring she could no longer suppress. Her father's words had sealed their cages, but also sharpened her determination to find the cracks. At school, Mr. Carter continued to offer quiet encouragement. After class one afternoon, he stopped her as the other students filed out. "You've got more potential than you realize, Evelyn," he said, his voice steady. "Scholarships, opportunities, doors that won't stay open forever. Have you thought about applying?" Evelyn hesitated, her father's voice echoing in her head. "A Holloway daughter serves her family." But another voice whispered louder now, her own. She nodded slowly. "Yes, I've thought about it." Mr. Carter handed her a packet of forms. "Then don't just think, start. I'll help you." Her hands trembled as she slipped the papers into her folder, hiding them beneath layers of schoolwork. Walking home, she felt the weight of the forms pressing against her side like contraband. Yet instead of fear, there was a thrill in carrying them. Meanwhile, Clara's rebellion took a different shape. She met Anna in the courtyard behind the school, handing her small sketches folded into envelopes. "Just a few," Clara whispered nervously. "Nothing too noticeable." Anna grinned, tucking them into her bag. "My aunt already asked if you'll make more." "People love them, Clara. You could sell every piece you draw." Clara blushed, her fingers twisting together. "If my father ever found out, then he won't," Anna interrupted firmly. "You're not just a Holloway girl. You're an artist. Don't forget that." The words lit Clara's face with both pride and fear. She walked home with her sketchbook pressed close to her chest, a secret she refused to let go. Back at the Holloway house, the sisters lived in careful duality. In the daylight, they moved with practiced obedience, folding laundry, sweeping floors, reciting scripture when asked. But when night fell and their father retired to his chair, their hidden lives emerged. Evelyn worked by lamplight, filling out scholarship essays with her pen, moving quickly across the pages. Clara sat beside her, sketching in silence, her drawings capturing open skies and unshackled figures that neither of them dared speak of aloud. One evening, Evelyn whispered, "If I can get out, maybe I can pull you with me." Clara looked up from her drawing, her eyes wide. "Do you really think that's possible?" "I have to believe it," Evelyn answered, her voice firm despite the pounding of her heart. "Because if I don't, then he wins. And I can't let him win." Clara nodded slowly, her face glowing with cautious hope. Their mother noticed the change, though she said little. Margaret's eyes lingered longer on her daughters, catching the whispers, the exchanged glances, the faint light of something dangerous and beautiful growing between them. One night, as she passed their doorway, she paused, watching them bent over their work. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask. Instead, she simply said, "Be careful," and walked on. The sisters exchanged a look after she left, their secret confirmed. Their mother knew. And though she couldn't shield them entirely, she wasn't their enemy. But secrecy carried its own dangers. Every knock at the door, every sudden question from their father sent a chill down Evelyn's spine. She tucked scholarship forms beneath her mattress. Clara slid her earnings between the lining of her sketchbook, and both prayed their father wouldn't notice the spark of freedom flickering behind their eyes. Still, even under the weight of fear, the rebellion grew. In hidden pages and sealed envelopes, in drawings passed through trusted hands, the Holloway girls had begun to build a world their father could not control. It was fragile, it was dangerous, but it was theirs. The first hint of danger came on a Wednesday evening. Evelyn had been working on her scholarship essay in secret, her papers spread across the desk upstairs. She had heard her father's heavy boots in the hallway, and in a rush shoved the forms beneath her pillow. But Thomas's knock was sharp, his voice carrying through the wood. "Evelyn, open this door." Her heart raced as she pulled the latch. He stood in the doorway, his gaze sweeping the room with its usual severity. "What are you hiding?" "Nothing, sir," Evelyn answered quickly, forcing her breath to steady. Thomas's eyes lingered on the desk, the pen still warm in her hand. For a moment, Evelyn thought he would cross the room and tear everything apart. Instead, he stepped back. "Remember your place," he said coldly. "Idleness breeds sin." Then he left, his footsteps echoing down the stairs. Evelyn shut the door, her hands trembling. Clara looked up from her bed, eyes wide with fear. "He almost saw," she whispered. "I know," Evelyn said, pressing the papers tighter under the pillow. "But he didn't. Not this time." Clara turned away, clutching her sketchbook. "One day he will." The warning in her sister's voice lingered, even as Evelyn forced herself to return to her writing. 2 days later, Clara's own rebellion met its punishment. She had been sketching in the quiet of the living room while their father napped, the page alive with color and light. When Thomas awoke, his eyes landed on the drawing. For a moment, he simply stared at the page. Then his hand closed around it. "What is this nonsense?" he demanded, his voice sharper than usual. Clara froze. "It's just a drawing," she stammered. Thomas's face darkened. "A waste of time. A Holloway girl has no business with foolishness." With one swift motion, he tore the page in half, the sound of paper ripping like a wound opening in the air. Clara gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Evelyn, standing near the doorway, felt her chest clench with rage, but she dared not move. "Go to your room," Thomas ordered. Clara ran upstairs, tears streaming down her face. Evelyn followed minutes later, finding her sister curled on the bed, clutching the scraps of paper as though they were pieces of herself. "He destroyed it," Clara whispered brokenly. "He'll destroy everything." Evelyn knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Then we make more. We keep making them until he can't destroy us anymore." Clara looked at her, torn between despair and belief. "You're braver than me?" "No," Evelyn said firmly. "I'm just too angry to stop." That night, the tension between them deepened. Clara's fear made her cautious, hesitant to draw even when the house was quiet. Evelyn, on the other hand, felt her determination harden. Every word she wrote was a silent act of defiance, every page a promise that she would not be erased. But the pressure of secrecy strained their bond. When Evelyn spoke of her scholarship plans, Clara's voice trembled with doubt. "What if you fail? What if he finds out? You'll lose everything." "And if I don't try?" Evelyn snapped. "Then I've already lost." The words hung heavy in the room and silence fell between them. Clara returned to her sketches, her pencil moving slowly, while Evelyn bent over her pages, her pen scratching with quiet fury. Downstairs, Thomas sat in his chair, the glow of the lamp casting sharp shadows across his face. His eyes were steady, his posture rigid, as though he could sense rebellion stirring in the air. And in his silence, Evelyn knew the truth. The more they pushed against his rules, the closer they came to the edge of discovery. Yet even as fear gripped her, she refused to stop. Because surrender, she thought, was the one limit she would never accept. The letter came on a grey morning, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened rain. Evelyn found it tucked among the mail again, her name written in bold across the envelope. She slipped it into her school books before her father could see, her heart pounding so loudly she feared he might hear it. Upstairs, she tore it open with shaking hands. The words leapt off the page, "Full scholarship awarded." Admission granted. She pressed the letter to her chest, breathless, her eyes stinging with tears. For the first time, freedom wasn't just a dream, it was written in ink, undeniable. Clara entered the room moments later and froze when she saw the letter. "Evelyn, is that what I think it is?" Evelyn's smile trembled as she held it out. Clara read quickly, her hand flying to her mouth. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did it," Evelyn corrected softly, "because I can't leave without you." Clara's eyes glistened, but her joy faltered into hesitation. I don't know if I can. Every time I even think about stepping past that fence, I hear his voice. I see what he did to my drawings. If he catches us— Evelyn grabbed her hands, gripping them tightly. Listen to me. We can't stay here. He'll keep us trapped forever. She shook the letter gently. This is our way out. Clara's voice cracked. What if I'm not strong enough? You are, Evelyn insisted. You've been strong every day of your life, even when you thought you weren't. Drawing in this house, that's strength. Surviving him, that's strength. Clara looked away, tears spilling down her cheeks. But what if you're forced to choose? What if only one of us makes it out? The words hit Evelyn like a blow. She swallowed hard, forcing her voice to steady. Then it has to be me. And if I make it, I'll find a way to come back for you. Clara's face twisted with pain. That's not fair. It's not, Evelyn admitted, her voice breaking. But neither is living like this. The room fell silent except for the steady patter of rain beginning against the window. Evelyn folded the letter carefully, slipping it back into her book. For a moment, she felt both triumphant and guilty, hope battling with fear inside her chest. That evening at supper, Thomas spoke of family duty again, his words sharp, his eyes watchful. Margaret kept her gaze lowered, serving food quietly, her shoulders hunched as if bracing against a storm. Evelyn sat in silence, her scholarship letter burning like fire in her pocket, a secret so powerful it made her skin prickle. Afterward, when the dishes were done and the house quieted, Margaret entered the sisters' room. She looked at Evelyn, her eyes knowing. You've heard back, haven't you? Evelyn froze. How? A mother knows, Margaret interrupted gently. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You must leave, Evelyn. One of you has to break free, or you'll both vanish in this house. Clara shook her head, panic flashing across her face. He'll find out. He'll never let her go. Margaret's lips tightened. Then you must not let him find out. Promise me you'll try. Evelyn stared at her mother, her throat tight. I promise. Margaret placed a trembling hand against her cheek. Good. Then I'll do what I can when the time comes. The rain outside grew heavier, beating against the roof like a warning. Evelyn lay awake that night, staring into the darkness, the letter hidden beneath her pillow. Her father's voice still rang in her ears, declaring her future sealed, but another voice, her own, rose stronger. The choice was no longer whether to defy him. The choice was how much they were willing to risk. And risk, Evelyn knew, was all that remained. The air in the Holloway house felt heavier than usual, as though the walls themselves knew a secret was about to unravel. Evelyn carried her scholarship letter carefully, hidden within the folds of her schoolwork, but each day the burden of secrecy grew harder. Every glance from her father felt sharper, every question edged with suspicion. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, Thomas sifted through the day's mail. His thick fingers tore open envelopes with mechanical precision. Evelyn froze when she saw a familiar seal flash in his hands. Another letter from the college, one she hadn't expected. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the page. Silence filled the room. Margaret's hands stilled in her lap. Clara's breath caught audibly, and Evelyn felt her blood run cold. What is this? Thomas asked, his voice low, dangerous. Evelyn's throat tightened. It's addressed to me, his gaze snapped to her. You've been writing to colleges. Before she could answer, Clara blurted out, It's nothing, Father, just a school thing. Everyone was supposed to apply. Her voice cracked, desperate, but her attempt at deflection only deepened the tension. Thomas rose slowly, the letter trembling in his hand. Don't lie to me. Clara's face crumpled. She just wanted to see if she could— Clara! Evelyn hissed, her heart racing. But the damage was done. Thomas's eyes shifted back to Evelyn, his expression dark with fury and certainty. You've gone behind my back. Evelyn's pulse hammered. I was only trying to disgrace this family. His voice thundered now, filling every corner of the house. A Holloway daughter does not run away to chase foolish dreams. You are mine to guide, and you will obey. Clara flinched, tears slipping down her cheeks. "It's my fault," she whispered. "I almost told him—" Evelyn turned sharply to her sister. "Don't," she said firmly, her voice trembling with both anger and fear. "Don't blame yourself. This is on him, not you." Thomas loomed over them, his presence suffocating. "On me? No, Evelyn, it's on you. You've forgotten what it means to be a Holloway. You've let the world poison you with lies about freedom and ambition. I will not allow it." Evelyn's chest burned with rage, but she forced herself to remain still, to keep from saying the words that would make everything worse. She caught her mother's eyes across the room. Margaret looked stricken, yet she gave the faintest shake of her head, a silent plea for Evelyn not to push further. The night dragged on, thick with unspoken words. When Thomas finally left the room, the girls retreated upstairs. Evelyn slammed the door shut, her hands shaking. "You almost gave me away," she snapped at Clara, her voice sharp with panic. Clara's eyes filled again. "I didn't mean to, He was staring at you like he already knew. I thought if I explained it would soften him." "Nothing softens him," Evelyn said bitterly. She paced the room, pressing her hands against her temples. "You can't protect me by confessing. You'll only destroy everything we've worked for." Clara sank onto the bed, her shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't want to lose you, Evelyn. I don't want you to go." The words cut deep. Evelyn stopped, her anger dissolving into exhaustion. She sat beside her sister, pulling her into a trembling embrace. "You won't lose me, I swear it. But if we let him win, we'll both lose ourselves." Clara nodded weakly, clinging to her. In the darkness of their room, Evelyn realized the cost of chasing freedom was growing heavier. Secrets were dangerous, but betrayal, even accidental, was deadly. And though she loved her sister fiercely, Evelyn knew the path ahead would demand more than love. It would demand sacrifice. The house was quieter than usual after the confrontation. Thomas carried himself with the pride of a man who believed he had restored order, his voice measured but sharper in every command. For Evelyn and Clara, each day felt like walking across glass, careful not to let a single crack betray them. It was late one evening when Margaret entered their room. Her face looked older in the lamplight, the lines around her mouth deeper, her eyes shadowed with something Evelyn hadn't seen before. Resolve. She closed the door softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Evelyn, Clara, I need to speak with you." The sisters exchanged wary glances. Clara sat up quickly, her sketchbook sliding from her lap. Evelyn straightened, her heart pounding. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly together. For a long moment she stared at them as though deciding whether to continue. Finally she spoke. "When I was your age, I wanted to be a nurse." Evelyn frowned, startled. "You?" Margaret gave a small, sad smile. "I was offered a scholarship. I would have studied in Louisville. I wanted to help people, to make a life for myself beyond this town. But my father said no. He said duty came before dreams. And when I married Thomas, he promised me a stable future. I thought, maybe that was enough." Her voice broke, and she looked down at her hands. "It wasn't. I let that dream die, and I've carried the weight of it every day since." Clara's eyes glistened. "Mama." Margaret reached into her apron and pulled out a small cloth pouch, the fabric worn and faded. She opened it slowly, revealing folded bills, creased and thin. "I've been saving for years, coins from groceries, change he never counted. It isn't much, but it's something." She pressed the pouch into Evelyn's hands. "Use this. When the time comes, use it to get away." Evelyn's throat tightened. "Mother, if he finds out—" "Then he finds out," Margaret interrupted, her voice sharper than they'd ever heard. "But I won't let both of you live the life I did. One of you must escape, even if it costs me everything." The sisters sat in stunned silence. Clara reached for the pouch, her fingers trembling as she touched it. "You're risking so much," she whispered. Margaret shook her head. "I'm giving you what I should have given myself, a chance. Don't waste it." Evelyn looked at her mother, the weight of her sacrifice pressing into her chest. How can we leave you here with him? Margaret's eyes softened. I've made my peace with this house. But you still have futures waiting. Take them. The room grew still. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, rattling the shutters. Inside, Evelyn held the pouch tightly, its small weight feeling heavier than anything she had ever carried. Clara sat beside her, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. I don't know if I'm strong enough, Clara whispered. Margaret cupped her cheek gently. You are. Strength doesn't always look like fighting. Sometimes it looks like surviving long enough to leave. For the first time, Evelyn saw her mother not as a figure of silence, but as a woman who had once dreamed, who still dreamed through them. And in that moment, she understood that rebellion wasn't only theirs, it had been passed down, waiting for them to carry it forward. When Margaret left the room, the sisters sat in silence. Evelyn unfolded the bills, counting each one, then tucked them back carefully into the pouch. Clara leaned against her, her voice a whisper. We can't fail now. Not after this. Evelyn nodded, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the window. We won't. But deep inside, she knew the path ahead would only grow more dangerous. The decision was no longer a whisper or a dream. It had become a plan. Evelyn lay awake night after night, the scholarship letter hidden beneath her pillow, her mother's pouch of money secured in the bottom drawer of her dresser. The time to act was drawing near. It was Clara who asked the question one evening. Her voice hushed as they sat side by side in their room. If we really go, how will we do it? Evelyn took a slow breath. We wait until after church. Father always lingers to speak with the pastor, and that gives us a window. The bus station in town runs until midnight. If we leave then, we can be gone before he realizes. Clara's hands twisted in her lap. And what if he does realize? What if he follows us? Then we don't let him, Evelyn said firmly. We'll be careful, we'll pack light, just enough to get us started. Once I'm at the college, I can help you. You can join me later, I promise. Clara's eyes filled with tears. You say it like it's simple, but I don't feel simple. I feel like I'm breaking apart just thinking about it. Evelyn reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. That's because you're scared. And fear means we're about to do something that matters. For days they spoke in fragments, planning quietly in corners of the house, their words hidden beneath the sound of chores and the weight of their father's silence. Clara gathered her best sketches, tucking them into a folder she could conceal under her coat. Evelyn wrote down bus times on scraps of paper, memorizing the routes. Their mother noticed, of course. Margaret seemed to move differently now, her glances sharper, her steps purposeful. One evening she paused at their door, her face pale in the dim light. You've chosen your moment, she said softly. Evelyn nodded. After church. Next Sunday. Margaret's lips trembled, but she forced a smile. Then I'll be ready. Ready for what? Clara asked, her voice small. For whatever distraction he'll need, Margaret replied, her eyes flicking toward the stairs. You go when you can, don't wait for me. The sisters looked at her in stunned silence. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. Mother, I've lived with his rules long enough, Margaret interrupted firmly. If my role is to hold his attention so you can get away, then so be it. The finality in her voice silenced them. Evelyn wanted to argue, to protest that it was too dangerous, but the truth settled heavily in her chest. Her mother had already chosen her part in this escape. The week crept by slowly, each day sharpened by fear. Thomas remained suspicious, his eyes following every movement, his voice carrying the weight of command at every meal. Evelyn pretended obedience. Clara forced her laughter at Anna's jokes in the schoolyard, but beneath their careful masks, they counted the hours. The night before their plan, Evelyn could barely breathe. She sat at the edge of her bed, the pouch of money pressed to her chest, the scholarship letter folded into her coat pocket. Clara paced the room, her face pale. What if I freeze? She whispered. What if I can't walk away? Evelyn stood and pulled her into an embrace. Then I'll drag you if I have to, but we'll move, we have to. Clara clung to her, trembling. Promise me you won't leave me behind." "I promise," Evelyn whispered, though deep inside she feared the choice might not be hers to make. Outside, the night was still, the sky heavy with stars. Inside, the Holloway girls lay awake, hearts pounding, knowing that by this time tomorrow their lives would either be transformed or destroyed. The church service dragged on longer than usual, the pastor's voice filling the sanctuary with measured sermons about obedience and sacrifice. Evelyn sat rigid in the pew, her scholarship letter folded deep in her coat pocket, her mother's pouch of money pressed against her ribs. Beside her, Clara fidgeted, her eyes darting to the tall stained-glass windows as though they held the promise of escape. When the final hymn ended, Thomas shook the pastor's hand and lingered, as expected, to speak with him. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment they had planned for. Outside, the evening air was cool, the sky painted with streaks of pink and gold. Evelyn tugged Clara's sleeve, guiding her toward the edge of the crowd. Clara's steps faltered, her breath uneven. "I can't," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. "Evelyn, I can't move." Evelyn turned sharply. "Yes, you can. We've come too far." Clara shook her head, her body trembling. "If he finds us, if he sees, I'll freeze. I know I will." Evelyn's chest ached, torn between urgency and compassion. "Clara, listen to me. Fear doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means it matters." Before Clara could answer, Thomas's voice boomed behind them. "Where are you two going?" Evelyn's stomach dropped. Slowly she turned. His eyes were sharp, suspicious, scanning their faces, their coats, their nervous posture. "We were just walking to the car," Evelyn said quickly, forcing calm into her voice. Thomas stepped closer, his gaze narrowing. "Both of you look guilty. What have you been hiding?" The silence stretched, brittle as glass. Clara's lips parted, her eyes wide with terror. Evelyn feared she would confess everything. But then, from across the yard, Margaret's voice cut in. "Thomas," she called, her tone firmer than usual. She held a handkerchief in her hand, her face pale. "I need your help. The pastor wants to speak with you. Something about the donation books." Thomas frowned, distracted. "Now?" "Yes, now," Margaret said, her eyes locking on Evelyn's for the briefest second. It was enough. Evelyn understood. This was the distraction her mother had promised. Thomas grumbled, turning toward Margaret. "Stay where you are," he barked at the girls before striding across the yard. Evelyn grabbed Clara's hand. "Now!" she whispered fiercely. They ran, their footsteps pounding against the gravel road, hearts racing as the town lights flickered ahead. Every sound behind them felt like pursuit, every shadow a threat. Clara gasped for breath, her grip slipping. "Evelyn, wait!" she cried, stumbling. Evelyn pulled her forward. "Don't stop!" But Clara froze, her body rooted to the ground, tears streaking her face. "I can't do it. I can't leave her. I can't leave Mama." Evelyn's chest heaved. She wanted to scream, to drag her sister by force, but the desperation in Clara's voice broke her. "You have to go," Clara whispered, shoving Evelyn's hand away. "One of us has to make it. It has to be you." Evelyn shook her head violently. "No, not without you." Clara's eyes filled with sorrow, but her voice held steady for once. "If you stay, we both lose. If you go, at least one of us wins. Please, Evelyn, run." Behind them, Thomas's voice thundered across the road. "Evelyn! Clara!" There was no time. Evelyn's heart split, but she turned, clutching the pouch of money, her legs propelling her forward into the darkness. She didn't look back, because if she did, she knew she would stop. The sound of her father's rage echoed behind her, mixing with Clara's muffled sobs and her mother's raised voice. Evelyn's chest burned with guilt and terror, but she kept running. Because in that moment, she understood. Freedom demanded everything. The bus rattled down the highway, its windows streaked with dust, the dark fields of Kentucky rolling by like endless shadows. Evelyn pressed her forehead against the glass, her reflection pale and drawn. Her fingers clutched the pouch of money, the scholarship letter folded carefully inside her coat pocket. Every bump of the road carried her farther from the Holloway house, yet her heart remained tangled in the voices she had left behind. When the lights of Louisville appeared in the distance, bright and alive, she felt both wonder and grief. She had imagined this moment countless times: freedom, possibility, escape. But it was not how she thought it would be. Clara's face haunted her, the sound of her voice begging Evelyn to run still echoing in her ears. By the time the bus hissed to a stop, the city surrounded her in noise and movement: car horns, footsteps, the smell of food from street vendors. It was overwhelming, but Evelyn held herself steady. She walked through the station, clutching her bag, her pulse racing. This was her new beginning. Days later, as she unpacked her few belongings in a small dorm room, she felt the weight of silence again, not the suffocating silence of her father's house, but the strange quiet of freedom. She opened her sketchbook, not hers but Clara's, a single page torn from her sister's work that she had taken as a reminder. The drawing showed a girl standing beneath an open sky, unchained, unafraid. Evelyn traced the lines with her finger, whispering, "I'll come back for you." Back in the Holloway house, life continued, but not unchanged. Clara stayed, her father's control pressing harder now that Evelyn was gone, yet something within her had shifted. She still drew in secret, sketching late at night, her art hidden under the floorboards. Each stroke of her pencil was a quiet refusal to let her spirit be broken. Margaret endured, her days as silent as ever, but her heart carried a secret victory. She had helped one daughter escape, and that knowledge gave her strength. When Thomas barked orders, she nodded, but in her silence lived defiance. She had seen Evelyn slip away into the night, and she clung to the belief that change had begun. For Evelyn, the college campus was both daunting and exhilarating. She attended lectures, filled notebooks with ideas, and walked through hallways where no one knew the Holloway name. Yet at night, when she sat at her desk, she wrote letters she never dared to send. Letters to Clara, describing the city, the freedom, the taste of possibility. Letters to her mother, thanking her for the sacrifice that had made it all possible. Letters to herself, promising she would not waste what had been given. One evening, as she read from her poetry collection, the same one her mother had slipped into her hands, Evelyn felt a surge of clarity. She realized her freedom was not only for herself, it was for Clara, for Margaret, for every Holloway woman who had been told to serve and stay silent. She carried their voices within her, and through her success she would prove their worth had always been greater than obedience. She walked outside, the campus alive with chatter and laughter, the autumn air crisp and cool. Looking up at the vast sky, she whispered, "We're free, even if only one of us is here. For now." Evelyn knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she also knew this: cages may hold bodies, but they cannot hold dreams forever. And as long as she lived, she would fight to keep the Holloway name from meaning only servitude. Her story was just beginning. Subscribe now to follow the Holloway girls' journey of resilience and survival, and don't forget to click the video suggested on your screen to continue this powerful story.